3, right? And it talks about the still waters. When we look at Maona and how Disney and how they take this information from the heavens, the motion pictures from the heavens, and then reform these stories for profit, right? And then manipulate the images based upon the artistry that they have to change even sometimes the actual depictions of what these people really look like in actuality. Right? All of these things, when you look at Hollywood, are done intentionally. But understand, when we look at Manoah in Psalms 23, the resting place, and the significance of Manoah is, you notice here the Ma, and then you have Noah's name. So when you look at Noah in the ark, in the dwelling place, the resting place, and the Shabbat, in this region of the scepter, the mother, the Ma, was also called an Amazon, a Mason, the Masuns. When you look at the Masons or the Masuns, right, the mother's sons and the winds bringing the mother's sons from the eastern border of the Pacific to the western border of the Pacific. So understand that. That is essential to understand. Okay? Let's keep going. All right, let's go.
So Manoah would mean express when you see the peaceful Pacific Ocean and the Shalom seas, the peaceful seas, Pacific Ocean, and Manoah, the resting place, the home place. Understand the connection, how Disney. So the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. The still waters, right? The still is Manoah.
Psalms 23, the dwelling place, Shabbat, rest, and the still waters. So these seas and these winds, as I was saying about the monsoons and the Masons from the Amazonian region, would allow for them to begin these crossings during these different times. So we're talking about going from death into life, as the Hollywood was talking about. Understand, shalom. Rest in peace. So we're talking about going from the eastern border, right, into these regions, from along this equator region. So when we look here at these measures of the sacred geometry and how the sacred geometry in pi 3.14, when you look at pi and the circumference of a circle, the fall from this region here of 90 degrees west to 90 degrees east gave the circumference of the diameter. So a lot of the merchandise that's transported now from these day and age is still done along a lot of these ancient routes. So you see Psalms 23, right? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. As I was saying, Noah, to rest, to settle. When we look at Manoah and the place of rest, the dwelling place, these lands here of the coast, the eastern border of the Pacific, was a resting place, was a sanctuary, was a dwelling place to be in peace. So we look at Ra'ah, the shepherd, and the beginning to cross over into these lands of Asia.
And Ra'ah, the shepherd, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. That shepherd, Ra'ah, the shepherd stick, the lamed, the staff, right? The guidance, the wind of Shu. Understand Yeshua, Joshua, Joseph, Yeshua, the holder of the sky. We understand the 4 pillars, the 4 pegs of the tent that hold up the tent.
So like I was saying, right? I was talking about Joshua, right? I was talking about Joshua, Shu, and the wind. As I was going back to the Amazon and the crossings from the eastern border of the Pacific using the wind. The Ruach. So we look at the Ruach in the spirit. The spirit is what allowed crossings to come into these different lands, for these priests to embark their mission to circumnavigate the whole earth and establish righteousness throughout the whole earth. Now we are divinely given this authority to be this priest here on the earth, this mediums between heaven and earth, doing these crossings, using the spirit to go into these lands, to teach according to the signs of heaven, right? So when we look at Yeshua, we're gonna get into this real quick. Let me pull this up. This is a post from someone posted, and I tried to remix this shit a little bit, but let me find it here. Is it? Here it goes. So you see Yeshua, right? And this ancient god Shu. Now Shu is known for to be the holder of the sky, right? If you see him with the goddess nut with the stars all on her, he is holding up the sky, right? One hand here, one hand here. So when we look at the pi in Pisces, circumference of a circle, the fish, right? The spawning one, the one that spawned and came out of darkness, hibernation, and spawned during this time of the spring, to begin the new year, to begin this as heir, as ruler, divine monarch, sovereign, right? Divine sovereign. So when we look at these sovereigns and these monarchs, and Joshua, the son of Nun, was full of the spirit of wisdom. So we're talking about the spirit to walk in the wind. And the ability to cross over. As you see, Joshua was given the ability to come into the land of Canaan and take over the land. Because of keeping those commandments, the Most High said in the beginning of Joshua that keeping these commandments was going to give him and those the ability that no man was going to be able to stand before them. So the Most High and keeping these commandments has been essential for us to rule over our oppressors. So when we look at these Pisces and these different things, the Dogon, the fish god, and we have to understand the significance of these ancient priests, right? When we look at the Nedja, right, and the dark ones, the ancient ones, and the traveling of the Netta, the Negus, and these short statured Anu. We understand the Anu people, one of the oldest documented people. We look at Stonehenge and a lot of the creations of Stonehenge that come from these short statured people. So we understand these crossings of Shu and the using of the winds. That's why I wanted to come here, so we could see here in the book of Joshua, even when we look at Armuru and Narmer's palette, and these Asiatics that invaded, they came from the Americas and crossed over into these lands of 120 degrees east and eventually came into Africa. So we understand the beginnings of knowing the circumference of the earth was known by these ancient Asiatics that came from the Americas, from the bottom, from the southern region of the crossing over from the Southern Cross over to this period of time now of the north as we come into the spring. So September. So when you're talking about September, you have to understand September and the scepter not departing from Judah, right? So these travelers in the coronation process, the annual coronation process, you understand Enos and annuals, right? To be made anew, an atonement, and this period of time of atonement from September to come across the Southern Crossing. Around Hawaii, Oceania during this time of the winter, to then come into the regions of Indonesia, into the East Indies, right? So we're talking about from the West Indies to the East Indies is what marked this circumference of a circle. They gave out the diameter of the earth, the circumference of the earth. So this is why Christopher Columbus and other individuals that came to this location were confused and thought that this was India, Japan, and all these different things. Is because of its locational significance along the pole and how the ancients discovered the ancient circumference of the earth. Okay? Hope that makes sense. Let's go. Let's keep going.
If we say it for sure.
How we get up here? Okay.
This is where
So this is how we get when we look at the Shabbat. What's up with it, bro? And this is how a lot of times people say, how is there an evening in the morning? What's up with you, bro? What's up here? just showing about these crossings, man, and the significance of pi, right? It's showing how pi and the circumference of the earth. Hold on, let me pause this. Talking about pi and the circumference of the earth, and how knowledge of, when we look at the fall, September, and the scepter gave the information from the fall equinox to the spring equinox on the circumference of the earth, and these different measures from pi, and how the sign of Jonas, 3 days and 3 nights, all of these things became significant, even with the measure of pi, 3.14. Yeah, it should be. I'm gonna try to save it though, for sure. So I was looking at Psalms 23, and it talks about the still water, showing how the winds here from the eastern border of the Pacific will allow for these navigations to take place based upon the winds. So because there was no motors and different things, the wind was very essential for these crossings. And so the earth timing and knowing when to leave and when to go to begin your mission was essential, because you had to go on the earth time, not only your time, but the earth's time. So this is what we're looking at. As you see here, I spent the whole year calculating, saying the measure of the sun from the different tropics. From the northern tropic from the time of Cancer, the southern. What I noticed is the sun during different seasons will rise in different stations.
Understand the luau's, the lael, the night, and the hips, the twirling, right? Hula hooping or Honolulu. Understand lael, the loop that takes for levitation, for the completion to rise up of the 24 hours to rise into a new day. So understand that ladder, right, that builds up a saw to make a saw and a star and the Pacific Ring of Fire and the Pacific Ocean.
Right. So, when we look at the evening and the morning being the first day, sometimes we don't understand how that is possible, right? How is the evening and the morning the first day? So this is why the knowledge of the whole earth was essential, because the sun never sets. Since the sun never sets, there had to be markers placed on the earth to determine when the ending of the day, when the beginning of the day was. So the fall, the spring, right, the equinoxes, the solstice, these things were essential to marking the annual process of the sun, to knowing times. And these things were measured by the twilights. So when you see me looking at these different things, I'm looking here at the different twilights to see what is the sun in the northern hemisphere, the southern hemisphere, because that's how the determination of these things were. It was called the sign or a seal or an oath. In the scriptures, it says that these things in the heavens are oaths. So you understand, when people sell their soul, they take an oath, right? They vow, right? So we gotta understand the connections with sound, the earth, and these ancient Hebrew travelers that crossed over. So like I was saying, the evening and the morning being the first day. And I would say, well, how is the evening and the morning the first day, right? When you understand the day doesn't begin in the evening. We have to understand what we call the Orient, right? When we call the Orient, or the land of the rising sun. Now, when the sun is the universal time, right? So there's a universal for the whole universe, because we all within this earth, this domain of the earth. So there's a universal time, and then there's a locational time, meaning where you are compared to what time it is in the earth, right, may be different. So the markers that were set upon this earth, right, to determine these different times, this is why landmarks and these temples and why these ancient star seeds had to let their names be known, so that these things could be forever memorials on the earth. So we're talking about the evening, right? So when the sun begins this new day, right? Like right now, we'll see what time it is, right? Right now it's about like 2 o'clock, 2:30, right? So when the sun sets here about 5 o'clock, right? The universal time, it's going to be a new day, right? The sun's gonna be rising in the regions of Indonesia, China, Tokyo, and these regions to begin the new day. Here it is going to be evening. So the land of Eve, the land of the evening, is here in the Americas for the universal time. So when the East begins a new day, people say, well, when do you begin the Shabbat? When do you begin the Shabbat? You got to understand that when the Shabbat starts in the East, right, the sun, I'm talking about the daytime. When the daytime starts for the Shabbat in the East, it is the first day of the evening. It's the beginning of the evening here in the Americas. So this is how the evening, look at Eve, the mother, Ava, right? Ama, and the mother. And this region of September, the Virgo, became such a significance in the fall, the coronation, and the flooding of the Nile, and these different things in regards to the winter. When we look at Holly and Hollywood, and the significance of these motion pictures, as we're talking about the capturing of motion, right? That is the capturing of time, right? So time and history has to be captured within its motion in line with the mythology of what we call the zodiac and different things, right? Because it's explaining the sounds that created this particular time to calculate. So hope this makes you understand the significance of the evening being the beginning of the first day, right? Because when the sun has risen in the east, right, to begin the new day, to begin the Shabbat in the east, it is the evening here. And then once the sun sets and crosses and rises for us in the west to begin our day Shabbat, right, the east has their evening, you understand, waiting on the new day. So this is how time and calculations are essential. So this is why this landmass, when we look at the Dark Ages, and not having a whole access to a whole circumference of the earth, talking about a whole 180 degrees. We look at this new world, damn near was not calculated. So hopefully this explains the crossings. And this is when we look at what it means to cross over, Abar, Hebrew. So this is what took place. You know what I'm saying? Look here, this is 0 degrees. Right here, Africa, in this region, another 180 would bring you to where the sun sets. So this is sometimes looked at the sunrise for us here in this land, because when we see the sunrise, for most of us that are here on this west coast, the sun is here in this portion, right? So these measures and these time zones are essential to understanding the whole universal time structure. So as we look at what's taking place now in the spring, Passover, right, to then eventually come into this area here of the first fruits, the Gemini, Taurus. This is where we start to see the significance of the twins and the explanation of Janus and Juno in these connections, right? So like I was saying, the whole earth had to be mapped out. So understand what I was saying earlier. So when the evening begins here, when it's midnight here, it is high noon here, right? So understand when the Shabbat begins here, it is the evening here. So this is how when we try to find out the origins of creation. Where was the sun birthed from? The birthplace of the sun. This is why some say Africa is the birthplace of the sun, or some maybe might say the Pacific Ocean is what the sun was extracted out of the waters, the Mayim, and risen to begin its first process. So there's a lot of teachings, a lot of mythology behind these creation stories. But everybody's creation story sometimes is adapted to their location. But you have to understand, my point is to understand why the evening and the morning are so essential. Because when the sun crosses and comes into this region, it is a new day. And the evening begins here. So while the Shabbat, the beginning of a Shabbat would be here, it would be the evening awaiting on the coming of the Shabbat for us in these lands. So understand that, and I hope that explains why we are called why they were called Hebrews, and the significance of these ancients, of these priest kings to go throughout the whole earth.